What started as a routine celebrity interview turned into television chaos when Nicolas Cage and Jimmy Kimmel clashed in an explosive confrontation that ended with security escorting the Oscar winner off set. The atmosphere in the Jimmy Kimmel Live studio felt different from the moment Nicolas Cage walked onto the stage. The audience applauded enthusiastically as the legendary actor, dressed in his signature black leather jacket, settled into the guest chair with his usual enigmatic smile. But seasoned viewers of late-night television could sense an underlying tension that seemed to crackle between host and guest from their very first exchange. Kimmel opened with what appeared to be standard celebrity banter, asking Cage about his latest film project. However, his tone carried an edge that regular viewers hadn't heard before. "So, Nick, another interesting career choice," Kimmel said with a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Some people are wondering if you're just taking any role that comes your way these days." Cage's expression shifted slightly, his famous intensity beginning to surface. "I choose my roles based on artistic merit and the opportunity to explore different facets of human experience," he replied, his voice measured but carrying a warning undertone. The host pressed forward, seemingly oblivious to the warning signs. "Come on, we've all seen the memes. National Treasure, Ghost Rider, and now you're doing independent films that most people haven't heard of. Are you having financial troubles?" The question hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Cage's jaw tightened, visibly, and members of the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. The actor leaned forward, his piercing gaze fixed on Kimmel with laser-like intensity. "Jimmy, I think there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about what we're doing here tonight," Cage said, his voice taking on that distinctive cadence that had made him famous. "I came here to discuss my craft, my passion for storytelling, and my respect for the art of cinema. I didn't come here to be mocked or to have my personal life dissected for cheap laughs." Kimmel chuckled dismissively, clearly not reading the room or recognizing the dangerous territory he was entering. "Oh, come on, lighten up. It's just comedy. Everyone knows you're a great actor, but you have to admit some of your recent choices have been questionable." The camera captured every micro-expression on Cage's face as his famous composure began to crack. His hands gripped the armrests of his chair, and his breathing became more deliberate. Anyone familiar with his films could recognize the signs. This was Nicolas Cage building toward one of his legendary explosive moments, but this time it wasn't scripted. "Questionable?" Cage repeated, his voice rising with each syllable. "Let me tell you what's questionable, Jimmy. What's questionable is inviting someone onto your show under the pretense of promoting their work, only to ambush them with personal attacks disguised as humor." The studio audience had gone completely silent. Even the band members looked uncomfortable, exchanging glances as they sensed the rapidly escalating tension. Kimmel's writing staff, visible in the wings, appeared frozen, unsure whether to intervene or let the confrontation play out. Kimmel, perhaps realizing he had pushed too far but unwilling to back down on live television, doubled down on his approach. "Look, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Your career has had some ups and downs, and people notice these things. It's not personal." "Not personal?" Cage's voice cracked with emotion and barely contained rage. "You just questioned my integrity as an artist, my financial stability, and my decision-making in front of millions of people. How is that not personal?" The host's face reddened, as he realized the interview was spiraling completely out of his control. The standard late-night format that had served him so well for years was crumbling before his eyes. "I think you're overreacting here, Nick. This is how these shows work." Cage stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. The sudden movement sent a ripple of shock through the studio audience. "This is how your show works, Jimmy. But it's not how respect works. It's not how professionalism works." The confrontation was reaching a boiling point, with both men now standing and facing each other across the interview desk. The tension had become so thick that even the camera operators seemed unsure where to focus their lenses. Kimmel's producers were frantically gesturing from the wings, trying to signal for a commercial break, but the host seemed determined to maintain control of his own show. "Sit down, Nick. You're making this bigger than it needs to be," he said, his voice taking on a condescending tone that only served to pour gasoline on an already raging fire. "Making this bigger?" Cage's voice boomed across the studio with the full force of his theatrical training. "You've spent the last 10 minutes systematically trying to humiliate me on national television, and you think I'm the one making this bigger?" His arms gestured wildly, punctuating each word with the dramatic flair that had made him a Hollywood legend. The audience sat in stunned silence, some pulling out their phones to record what was clearly becoming an unprecedented moment in late-night television history. Others looked around nervously, as if expecting security to rush the stage at any moment. Kimmel, his face now flushed with a mixture of embarrassment and stubborn pride, pointed his finger across the desk. "This is my show, and I'll conduct interviews however I see fit. If you can't handle a little comedy, maybe you shouldn't be doing publicity." The words hit Cage like a physical blow. His eyes narrowed to slits, and when he spoke, his voice dropped to a menacing whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the studio. "A little comedy? Jimmy, there's a difference between comedy and cruelty. There's a difference between entertainment and exploitation." "Oh, please," Kimmel scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "You're being dramatic. It's what you do, right? Make everything bigger than life?" The insult was the final straw. Cage's composure, which had been hanging by a thread, finally snapped completely. "Dramatic? You want to see dramatic?" His voice rose to a crescendo that would have made his most intense film performances pale in comparison. "I've been acting for over 40 years. I've won an Academy Award. I've brought characters to life that people will remember long after your cheap shots are forgotten." The studio fell into an eerie quiet, broken only by the hum of the cameras that continued rolling, capturing every second of the unprecedented confrontation. Even the usually chattering audience seemed to be holding its collective breath. Kimmel, perhaps finally realizing the magnitude of what he had unleashed, attempted to regain some semblance of control. "Look, maybe we got off on the wrong foot. Here, why don't we start over?" But Cage was beyond the point of reconciliation. His entire body language radiated barely contained fury as he leaned forward, placing both hands on the interview desk. "Start over? Jimmy, you can't unsay what you've said. You can't undo the disrespect you've shown not just to me, but to everyone who works hard in this industry." The host's face had gone pale, beads of sweat visible on his forehead under the hot studio lights. His usual quick wit seemed to have abandoned him entirely. "I think you're taking this way too seriously, Nick. It's just television." "Just television?" Cage's laugh was bitter and hollow. "This isn't just television to me. This is my life's work you're mocking. These are my choices, my passion, my dedication to an art form that means everything to me." The camera captured every nuance of emotion playing across both men's faces. Kimmel's growing panic and Cage's righteous indignation. The contrast was stark and undeniable, making it clear to viewers exactly who was in the wrong. Security personnel had begun to position themselves near the stage, though they seemed uncertain about when or how to intervene in what was clearly an explosive situation between two high-profile figures. Kimmel made one final attempt to salvage the interview. "Nick, come on. We're both professionals here. Let's just sit down and finish the segment like adults." Cage straightened to his full height, his presence suddenly seeming to fill the entire studio. "Adults? Jimmy, adults treat each other with respect. Adults don't invite guests onto their shows just to tear them down for entertainment value." The standoff continued, with neither man willing to back down, as the tension in the studio reached an almost unbearable level. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity before Cage broke it, with a voice that trembled with barely controlled emotion. "You know what the real tragedy is here, Jimmy? You had an opportunity tonight to have a genuine conversation with someone who's dedicated their entire life to storytelling. Instead, you chose to turn it into a circus. Kimmel's jaw clenched as he felt his authority as host slipping away with each passing second. The control room was undoubtedly in chaos, but he couldn't bring himself to call for the commercial break that might save face. His pride wouldn't allow it. I don't need a bad lecture from you about how to run my show, Nick. I've been doing this for years. Years of what? Years of tearing people down? Cage's voice cracked with the weight of his frustration. Years of hiding behind the excuse of comedy while you systematically humiliate your guests? That's not entertainment, Jimmy. That's bullying, with a bigger platform. The accusation hit Kimmel like a physical blow. His face contorted with a mixture of anger and wounded pride. Bullying? Are you kidding me? You're a grown man, a millionaire actor, and you're crying about bullying because I made a few jokes? Jokes? Cage's voice rose to a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the studio. You call questioning my financial stability a joke? You call mocking my artistic choices humor? Jimmy, there's a line between comedy and character assassination, and you crossed it the moment I sat down in this chair. Members of the audience began to murmur among themselves, some clearly uncomfortable with witnessing such raw conflict, others seemingly enthralled by the unscripted drama unfolding before them. The energy in the room had shifted from entertainment to something darker and more primal. Kimmel's composure was fracturing under the pressure. Sweat had begun to bead on his forehead, and his usual television smile had long since disappeared. Look, if you can't handle the heat of a late-night talk show, maybe you shouldn't be doing interviews at all. The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Cage responded with the full force of his theatrical intensity. Handle the heat? Jimmy, I've been in this business since before you knew what a television camera was. I've faced critics. I've dealt with bad reviews. I've survived career ups and downs that would have broken lesser people. But what I won't tolerate is disrespect, disguised as entertainment. The host made a desperate attempt to regain control, gesturing toward the audience. Come on, folks. This is getting a little intense, don't you think? But his attempt at levity fell flat. The audience remained largely silent, sensing that they were witnessing something unprecedented and potentially career-defining for both men. Cage turned slightly toward the camera, addressing not just Kimmel but the entire viewing audience. This is what happens when entertainment becomes exploitation, when we stop seeing each other as human beings and start treating each other as content to be consumed and discarded. Kimmel's face reddened further, his voice taking on a sharp edge. Oh, spare me the philosophy lesson. You're an actor, not a professor. Stop being so pretentious. The personal attack was the breaking point. Cage's entire body seemed to vibrate with rage as he pointed directly at Kimmel. Pretentious? For wanting to be treated with basic human dignity? For expecting professional courtesy? Jimmy, the only thing pretentious here is your assumption that your platform gives you the right to tear people down for sport. The confrontation had reached a fever pitch, with both men's voices echoing throughout the studio. The usual rhythms of late-night television had been completely abandoned, replaced by raw, unfiltered conflict that neither man seemed able or willing to control. Kimmel made one final desperate attempt to assert his authority. This is still my show, and I'm telling you to either sit down and finish this interview properly or leave. Cage's response came with the kind of theatrical timing that had made him famous, but this time the drama was entirely real. Leave? Jimmy, I wouldn't dignify this travesty with another second of my presence if you begged me to stay. The ultimatum had been delivered, and everyone in the studio held their breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation would resolve itself as both men stood locked in a battle of wills that threatened to destroy everything. The silence that followed stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Then, with the deliberate precision of a master performer, Nicolas Cage slowly removed his microphone and placed it carefully on the interview desk. The soft thud of the device hitting the surface seemed to reverberate through the entire studio, like a judge's gavel delivering a final verdict. "Jimmy," Cage said, his voice now eerily calm after the storm of emotion that had preceded it, "I came here tonight as a guest on your show, with respect for you as a fellow professional in this industry. But respect is a two-way street, and you've made it clear that you have none to offer." Kimmel's face had gone from red to pale, the weight of the situation finally beginning to sink in. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no words came. The realization that he had pushed one of Hollywood's most respected actors to the breaking point was written across his features in stark detail. The actor straightened his leather jacket with theatrical precision, each movement deliberate and filled with purpose. "What you've done here tonight isn't comedy, Jimmy. It's not entertainment. It's a public humiliation attempt that says far more about your character than it does about mine." Members of the audience began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, some nodding in agreement with Cage's words, others looking around nervously as if seeking an exit from the uncomfortable situation they found themselves witnessing. Cage turned toward the camera, addressing the millions of viewers who were undoubtedly watching this unprecedented meltdown unfold in real time. "To everyone watching at home, this is what happens when we forget that celebrities are human beings first, when we treat people as objects for our amusement, rather than individuals deserving of basic dignity." The host made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Nick, wait. Maybe we can work this out. Let's just take a breath and—" "Work this out?" Cage's laugh was sharp and bitter. "Jimmy, you can't work out disrespect. You can't negotiate basic human decency. You either have it or you don't. And tonight, you've shown everyone exactly what you're made of." The security personnel who had been hovering uncertainly near the stage finally began to move closer, though it was unclear whether they were there to escort Cage out or to protect him from any further confrontation. Kimmel's voice cracked as he made his final plea. "This is live television. You can't just walk out. Think about your career, your reputation." Cage's response came with the full weight of his decades in Hollywood behind it. "My reputation? Jimmy, my reputation was built on integrity, on dedication to my craft, and on treating people with respect. Walking away from this circus can only enhance that reputation." With that declaration, Nicolas Cage turned his back on Jimmy Kimmel and began walking toward the stage exit. Each step was measured and deliberate, like a man who had made a decision he would never regret. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as one of Hollywood's most recognizable figures made his dignified exit. Kimmel stood frozen behind his desk, his usual quick wit completely abandoned, as he watched his interview collapse into what would undoubtedly become one of the most talked-about moments in late-night television history. The cameras captured every second of his humiliation, his face a mask of shock and dawning realization of the magnitude of his mistake. As Cage reached the edge of the stage, he paused and turned back one final time. "To your audience, Jimmy, I'm sorry they had to witness this. You deserved better than a host who would sacrifice his guests' dignity for cheap laughs." The final insult was delivered with surgical precision, leaving no doubt about who had emerged victorious from this battle of wills. Cage disappeared into the wings, leaving behind a shell-shocked host and a studio full of witnesses to his professional destruction. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Kimmel's desperate attempts to regain composure as he faced an audience that had just watched him lose complete control of his own show. His usual closing remarks were stammered and incoherent, a far cry from the polished entertainer millions knew. Within hours, clips of the confrontation were spreading across social media like wildfire. The hashtags #OneYearRespect Nicolas Cage and Kimmel Meltdown began trending worldwide as viewers chose sides in what had become a defining moment about respect and professionalism in entertainment. The incident marked a turning point that would be remembered. Long after the studio lights dimmed, a reminder that even in the world of celebrity entertainment, dignity and respect remain non-negotiable values that no amount of fame or platform can excuse violating.